Welcome to Excel Class Hub. I'm Mr. Shola by name, your government teacher for today. Like I've always said, never stop learning. Today we are looking at another interesting topic in government, and the topic says the structure and workings of Nigeria federalism. The structure and workings of Nigeria federalism. Now we want to look at some of the highlights under this topic. What are the highlights? Number one, I will start with what is federalism? And secondly, what is Nigeria federalism? Of course, when we are talking about federalism, we must be able to differentiate between federalism as a general topic and Nigeria federalism. And then the third one is the historical foundation of Nigeria federalism. And then reasons for the adoption of Nigeria federalism. Then we look at the merit of Nigeria federalism and the demerit of Nigeria federalism. Then we'll now come to our reference question relating to the topic, the structure and workings of Nigeria federalism. Now, you will all believe with me that federalism as a topic could not be equated with Nigeria federalism. Of course, Nigeria adopted the structure of federalism based on so many historical factors. Of course, we are going to look at that. But before I go into that detail, what is federalism? Now, simply put, federalism can be defined as a political structure, that allows, underline the word allows, the division of governmental powers, from the center, of course, the central government, to other regional governments, or commonly called component units in your textbooks. So federalism itself, simply put, is defined as a political structure, beg your pardon for this omission, defined as a political structure that allows the division of governmental powers from the center to other regional government, like I've said earlier, or component units, as said in most of your government textbooks. So which means if this structure is in place, then the central government will have a condition of sharing powers with other governments at the regions. For example, let me take this circle to illustrate my point. Now, we have in Nigeria, we have the federal government, we have the state governments, and then we have the local government. So we have the federal government, state government, and then we have local government, or you call them local authorities. Now, in a federal structure, the central government shares part of the power she derives from the existing federal constitution with other governments at the regions. For example, the state government, the local government, they are regarded as components in the federal structure. So powers from the center is being shared, and this shared power is based on the provision of a federal constitution. So class, have a better understanding. A federal structure can be defined as a political structure that allows the division of governmental powers from the center, the federal government, to other regional government, the state and local government. All right. Now, I will introduce that to you. Now, what is Nigeria federalism? How do we understand Nigeria federalism? I will introduce the meaning of federalism or federal structure. Now, Nigeria federalism is simply put as this. Now, when you look at the meaning of federalism itself, defining the structure as allowing division of governmental powers from the center to other component units, similar thing is featured in defining Nigerian federalism. So let's look at it. Now, Nigerian federalism can be defined. Nigeria federalism can be defined as a political structure, that allows the division of governmental powers from the center to other tiers of government. Other tiers of government in the states. In other words, the Nigerian federalism states that power is divided among 3 levels of government. That is meaning of the word tiers of government. Power is divided among 3 levels of government. That is 3 tiers of government. And what do we mean? Power is divided from the federal to the states and also local authorities, or you call it local government. So in Nigerian federalism, there will be a provision of an existing federal constitution that will promote how power is divided between this government, and this government. In other words, in this division, the one at the center shares majority of the power, but as well, the constitution recognizes the one at the center as the most supreme among the other levels, or you use the word tiers of government. So the federal government, the state government, and the local government. So federalism allows division of power from the center to other regional governments. Nigeria federalism can also allows division of political structure or the division of power among the tiers of government. So explicitly, we have to list those tiers: the federal, the state, and the local government. Now, what could be the historical foundation of Nigeria federalism? We need to look at a little bit of history, because as government students, it is not only enough to know the president of your country. It is not enough to know the state government of your country. It's not enough to even say, I'm a government student, I'm good at government. But it's important for you to know the historical background of what we are talking about here, the Nigeria federalism, and how it is working. Now, I will take you to the lane of history under the historical foundation of Nigeria federalism. Of course, we should not forget as history students that the British took interest in Nigeria in 1847. The British had interest in Nigeria. They saw a particular continent known as Africa in the name of exploration, in the name of discovery, the name of missionary activities, in the name of trade. This particular continent was discovered, and a particular geographical entity was also seen. And that geographical entity later became named as Nigeria. Of course, it had different names before it became known as Nigeria. Under the British, it was called a protectorate of the North and the South. And later on, subsequently, the name began to change. We shall look at that here in this historical foundation. So, the British developed interest in Nigeria in 1847. And then, during this period, we have had missionaries coming into Nigeria through the British. We have traders coming to Nigeria through the British. We have had missionaries coming to Nigeria through the British, especially the Methodist Church missionaries. Most of them came through in the name of religion. But of course, I will not want to call them, I will not want to say that these particular people or group of people were here for espionage or let me use the common word, spies. No, they were, I don't want to use that word. But of course, as they go back to their countries, they mention the areas that they carry out most of their activities. And this will have come to the ears of the British government to say, where is this place? Let us see whether we can get or derive something fruitful from it. And aside that, we should not forget again that there was a period of competition among the European countries. And what kind of competition? The competition of how to source for raw materials. And of course, this particular geographical entity, which was later named Nigeria, became part of an exploring ground. Okay, what are the historical foundation that brought about the adoption of the word federal or federal structure in Nigeria today? Lest I forget, before I go into the historical foundation, of course, we are calling Nigeria, we have a preamble for Nigeria. And that preamble is what? Federal Republic of Nigeria. That's the title of Nigeria in the Constitution. Federal Republic of Nigeria. The 1999 Constitution gave Nigeria this preamble. Preamble means title. So the word federal is coming first as part of the name of Nigeria. And then the word republic came, and then the people living in the country. So the origin of this has historical foundation. So let's go. Now, the first thing we must understand about the historical foundation of why and how federalism was adopted as part of the political structure of Nigeria, and also as part of the name given to Nigeria as Federal Republic of Nigeria, was that in 1900, the British officially took over the administration of Nigeria. That is to say, the British recognized Nigeria as part of their field of administration. The control of Nigeria came under the British rule as far back as 1900. And then we should not forget again, the second point is that in 1906, there was the first amalgamation. There was the first amalgamation of the Northern and the Southern Protectorate. The first amalgamation of the Northern and the Southern Protectorate, which means the British recognize that the Northern Protectorate, the Southern Protectorate, they are under one administration. And then thirdly, we must understand again that in 1914, there was a total amalgamation of the whole Nigeria. And of course, it was during this period that the name Nigeria was born. The name Nigeria was born in 1914. So prior to this period of 1914, we have only had Northern Protectorate, Southern Protectorate, and the Lagos Colony. Of course, Lagos was the British headquarters of administration for Nigeria, apart from London, where authority was coming from, through the leadership of the Queen of England. Okay, now 1914, the name Nigeria was born. Now look at the way the British began to arrange Nigeria. 1900, official recognition of Nigeria. 1906, the first amalgamation, because many of our students believe that there is only one amalgamation. No, we have had amalgamation twice. We have the first amalgamation in 1906. We have the second amalgamation in 1914. And the second amalgamation is what brought the whole Nigeria together. That was in 1914. And of course, in 1914, we should not forget that the Nigerian Council was introduced. The Nigerian Council was introduced, composed of 36 members, led by the Governor General of Nigeria. All right. And then in 1914 as well, we come to understand that the composition of the Nigerian Council was merely a group of people that were serving as advisors. They were mere advisors to the colonial governor. They had no power to make laws, so it was an advisory body. The Nigerian Council, composed of 36 members, was merely what? An advisory body. All right. Then the fourth thing you must understand about the origin of Nigeria federalism was that in 1922, Sir Hugh Clifford. Sir Hugh Clifford introduced the first written constitution in Nigeria. That was the first written colonial constitution introduced by the British. Nigeria was never ruled by any constitution before this period. It was when the British came that they brought the idea of constitution making to the political structure of Nigeria. So before then, you will have want to ask that question. How was Nigeria controlled? Nigeria was controlled through two major means. Nigeria was controlled by proclamation. The British used proclamation for the north, and they used certification for the south. Proclamation, the north, certification for the south. So until a group of Africans led by Casely Afford went to London to protest against the harsh policies of the British, and then as a result of this, under the NCBWA, what do you mean by the NCBWA? The NCBWA is simply called National Congress of British West Africa. It was through the activities of the NCBWA, the National Congress of British West Africa, that the idea of constitution making was introduced to the political structure of Nigeria and other British colonies in West Africa. So 1922, Richard Arthur Hugh, beg your pardon, the colonial governor general as at that period, that's in the person of Hugh Clifford, introduced the first written constitution. And then one of the things that attracted federalism here was that this constitution introduced what we call limited franchise. How? Only residents of Lagos and Calabar in the south were eligible to vote. All the people in the north were not allowed to vote. So this was the first polarization in the constitution of Nigeria under Hugh Clifford. So there was limited franchise. Now the limitation of the franchise now showed that there is need for Nigeria to further divide ourselves. There is need for Nigeria to further create more space so as we'll be able to accommodate one another. Of course, don't forget that Nigeria is a multi-ethnic society. In Nigeria of today, we speak more than 300 languages with various diversity in our ethnic and cultural language and so on and so forth. So we have more than 300 language. Now, if you're having more than 300 language that we speak, that means we have more than 300 culture, we have more than 300 tradition, and we have more than 300 customs. The same in Nigeria. So the best structure that would have brought us together will have been the federal structure. But here, from the foundation of the history of federalism in Nigeria, we saw Hugh Clifford introducing polarization. The North was isolated from voting. So a foundation and a feature of why we need to adopt Nigeria federalism. Now, the fifth point is that in 1939, Sir Bernard Bodilon, the fifth colonial governor general of Nigeria, Sir Bernard Bodilon, divided the southern protectorate into two. There was a division here in 1939. So in 1939, the southern protectorate became east and west. Now, it was divided for the sake of administrative conveniency by Sir Bernard Bodilon, who happens to be the colonial governor general of that period. And then the foundation that Bernard Bodilon laid, bringing about what we call the east and western part of Nigeria, gave other colonial governor general the impetus to continue working on this structure. So Bernard Bodilon laid the foundation of Nigeria federalism in 1939 by dividing what? The south, the southern protectorate, into two, eastern and western provinces. And so in 1939, Nigeria became a province of the north, the east, and the west. No wonder my sixth point, in 1946, Arthur Richards, the colonial governor general of that period, worked on the foundation of Bernard Bodilon by introducing regional government. From the foundation of regional government, we now have regional politics. I'll still talk about this in when I want to mention about the demerit of the workings and structure of Nigerian federalism. So from regionalism, other things started coming in. So it was Richard that brought about the idea of regional government, regional legislature, and so on and so forth. So an indication that the foundation for Nigerian federalism started from this arrangement. 1900 official declaration of Nigeria as part of the British administrative structure. 1906 first amalgamation. Don't forget, the North and the South were brought together for the first time. 1914, the total amalgamation of the whole Nigeria, Lagos, Northern and Southern Protectorate. And of course, that was the year the word Nigeria came to exist as Nigeria. Initially, it was not Nigeria. It was known as Northern Protectorate and Southern Protectorate. And I said the name Nigeria was born in 1914. 1922, the first colonial written constitution in the history of Nigeria. Of course, the constitution only introduced a polarized structure by only allowing residents in the Southern Protectorate to vote. And where in the Southern Protectorate, Lagos and Calabar, residents of Lagos and Calabar were only allowed to vote. Not only that, if you are in the working class, you are allowed to vote. Not only that, if you have a particular salary structure, you are also allowed to vote. So limited franchise came from Richard's constitution. Some of the foundations that led to what we adopt as a federal structure. Then in 1939, Bernard Bodilon now brought about the idea of dividing the Southern Protectorate into provinces, Eastern Province and Western Province, for administrative conveniency. 1946, Arthur Richards introduced regional legislature. Then point number 7, in 1951, yes, John Macpherson brought about the idea of ministerial structure. He introduced the title minister as a portfolio as part of Nigeria political structure. And then, of course, it was under Macpherson that the name the House of Representatives was introduced. The political structure we call today House of Representatives came under the provision of Macpherson Constitution, an idea of how federalism was adopted in Nigeria. And then point number 8, in 1954, Sir Oliver Littleton brought about complete adoption of Nigeria federalism. The complete adoption of Nigeria federalism came under Oliver Littleton. Now, it was under Littleton that the division of governmental power was introduced. And this introduction came under certain lists of the Constitution. Of course, it was Littleton that made us to understand that there is what we call the exclusive lists in the Constitution, exclusive lists of subjects, exclusive lists of subjects. He also brought the idea of what? Concurrent lists of subjects, concurrent lists of subjects, and then the last one was what? Residual lists of subjects. Now, it was Oliver Littleton Constitution that brought about the idea of this particular list of subjects in the provision of the Littleton Constitution. However, what do you mean by that? That under this particular structure of federalism in the Constitution, there are subjects that are only meant for the federal government. That's why they call it exclusive lists. There are subjects that are meant for both the federal and state government. That is why it is called concurrent list. And there are subjects that are meant for the state government and local government. And that's why it is called residual list of subjects. Residual list of subjects. So the foundation for Nigeria federalism started from the analysis that I have given above. And of course, when you talk about Nigeria federalism, These are the few historical foundations that led to the adoption of why we call Nigeria today Federal Republic of Nigeria, in the name of diverse ethnic groups, diverse languages, diverse culture, diverse customs, and diverse traditions. So the only structure that that can bring us together, or that could have brought us together as brothers and sisters in unity, is the federal structure. So the Nigerian federalism, a few analysis of it. Of course, under Nigerian federalism, having looked at the historical background, we need to understand again Nigeria federalism and regionalism. At a time, after Nigeria became independent in 1960, Nigeria was, of course, not totally independent in 1960. How? Because as at 1960, the Queen of England was still the head of state of Nigeria. As at 1960, the highest court that controls the legal affairs in Nigeria was in London. And as at 1960, the Prime Minister does not exercise executive power. So it was until 1963 that Nigeria became fully independent, that the Queen and our court handed over power, Republican power, that's the Republic of Nigeria, Republican power, to the leaders in charge of authority. So for the first time, the Prime Minister exercised executive power as at 1963, while the President remains ceremonial in office. And we all know that the first leader in Nigeria who served as the Prime Minister was Alhaji Tafawa Balewa. And then, of course, we also know that the first ceremonial president, that means there was no executive power attached to his office. Ceremonial president in Nigeria as at 1963 was Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe. So we are all aware of that. So as at 1960, between 1960 to 1963, Nigeria was only operating on regional level. There was no state creation. In the history of Nigeria federalism, we will not be complete without mentioning the period Nigeria operated a federal, a regional structure, and the period when statism was introduced to the political structure of Nigeria. So the period of regional structure was between 1960 to 1963. Nigeria was having 3 regions. And what are the regions? The northern region, the capital for that particular region was commonly located to be in Kaduna. And then we have the western region, and then the western region, the capital is commonly located to be in Ibadan. And then we have the eastern region, and then the capital of this eastern region was meant to be in Enugu, or recognized to be in Enugu, beg your pardon. And then in 1963, there was a constitutional conference in the parliament. It was in this conference that it was thought of that we had minority that have been often neglected. So in 1963, the Midwestern region was created after amending the 1963 Constitution by the 2/3 majority of the federal parliament in the legislature. So the Midwestern region was introduced in 1963 to solve the issue of minority interest. So in 1963, Nigeria became a geographical entity of 4 regions. So we have the northern region, the western region, the eastern region, and the Midwestern region as at 1963. So Nigeria operated regionalism between 1960 to 1963. And subsequently, we continue with the history of the leaders of this region who were meant to be civilians. And of course, between 1963 to 1966, there was a bloody coup that took the life of the leader of Nigeria then, Alhaji Tafawa Balewa, who was brutally murdered with the particular bloody coup led by Kaduna Nzeogu Chukwuma Nzeogu. The nickname was Kaduna because he was brought up in Kaduna. He speaks Hausa fluently and he had influence in the north. So 9 majors who masterminded that particular coup bloody coup of January 15, 1966. That coup took the life of Tafawa Balewa, took the life of Ahmadu Bello, took the life of Ladoke Akintola, and also took the life of the Minister for Finance, Chief Festus Okotie-Eboh. So all these notable politicians were executed by these particular coup plotters. And of course, after the coup, Aguiyi-Ironsi was invited, being the most senior in rank in the military in Nigeria then. And let me remind you of history that Aguiyi-Ironsi was a bodyguard of John McPherson. As at 1951, Aguiyi-Ironsi served as the AD camp of John McPherson. So that was when the military of Nigeria, before it became known as the military, that was when it was known as Royal West Africa Frontier Force. This was a group of soldiers that were used by the British to fight the Second World War. Aguiyi-Ironsi was a member of this particular force, so he was drafted from this force. So when Nigeria military was officially recognized in 1956, the Nigerian Army, the Nigerian Navy, the Nigerian Air Force, when they were officially recognized in 1956, of course, Ironsi was there. So when the coup took place, he was the most senior military officer by rank. So Aguiyi-Ironsi was not part of those who plotted the coup. We must understand that, students. Aguiyi-Ironsi was the most senior in rank. So he was invited to inherit the shackles of that particular military coup. So when he came to power, the expectation of many people was that he will do the correction that was perpetrated by the 9 majors. But of course, he only came to announce that Nigeria has become a unitary state. So he introduced Decree 34 to the disappointment of many Nigerians, especially many Northerners, that were expecting that he will bring to justice those who have killed their major leaders in the north and of course in the west. But he only came to introduce Decree 34, which was unification decree. And that angered a lot of people. So after 6 months, there was a counter coup. And the counter coup, of course, led by T.Y. Danjuma, and then led to the assassination of Aguiyi-Ironsi, Adekunle Fajuyi, and many more military leaders in the history of Nigeria. Of course, between that period when the counter coup took place, the Northerners saw it as an opportunity for vengeance. So what happened? Everybody in the north began to rejoice that their brother Yakubu Gowon, who was the same rank in military with Colonel Odimegwu Ojukwu, so they began to rejoice. And of course, the Northerners took advantage of that, being that there was no education and there was nobody to have done a campaign that, look, we have to take things easy. So they began to slaughter the Igbos in the north. And they were slaughtered like rams, of course. And then, being between that period, Ojukwu made a complaint to the head of state, being the leader of the regional government in the east. And of course, it's like to him, Gowon is not making moves to stop these brutal murders of the Easterners and the North. Of course, Ojukwu went ahead to make make an edict. So Ojukwu introduced an edict because in those days, regional leaders in Nigeria had power to secede their region. Of course, Nigeria operated a form of confederal structure as at that period. So regional leaders had power to secede their region. So Ojukwu introduced an edict, and the edict now divided the eastern part of Nigeria from Nigeria, thereby declaring the eastern part of Nigeria as the Republic of Biafra. So in the course of this particular argument, General Gowon now saw that as a treason. You are part of Nigeria, you are not going anywhere. Of course, immediately Gowon swung into action by conveying a particular commission, and that commission was led by Dr. Francis Nwokedi. And then another commission was introduced, again, that was led by Justice Ayo Erikefe. Of course, as at that period, Erikefe was mandated, please, immediately give us a structure for Nigeria. And Dr. Ayo Erikefe introduced the 12-state structure as at 1967. prior to the period of the Nigeria-Biafra Civil War. The Nigeria-Biafra Civil War, of course, all the effort made to stop the war was to no avail. So the war commenced and lasted for 30 months. So the Nigeria-Biafra Civil War lasted for 30 months. So it was in between that period that Gowon introduced the state structure, but that did not stop the eastern region from seceding under the leadership of Colonel Chukwuemeka Odimegwu Ojukwu. So, and of course, after 30 months of brutal war, the aftermath of this war was that nobody won and nobody lost. No victor, no vanquish. So, between 1967, when the 12-state structure was introduced, under the Nigerian Federalism, there was a continuity from the subsequent government. Now, the government of Yakubu Gowon was toppled by the military junta of Murtala Mohammed, and then Gowon was in Uganda for OAU summit when the coup was masterminded, and it was announced that he is no longer in charge. And then, of course, Gowon would have loved to come back to Nigeria, but he was warned not to come back. And then some of his loyal boys in Nigeria took up arms and ammunition. And one of them happened to be Colonel Bukasuka Dimka, which people, a lot of Nigerians believe that he was the one that killed Murtala Mohammed. Of course, he was the leader of the coup, but he was not the one that took the shot. Another military officer took the shot, but he led the coup. So Murtala Mohammed, unfortunately, was assassinated after 6 months in power on the 13th of February, 1976. But before then, Murtala Mohammed also continued with the legacy of Gowon. Gowon introduced the 12-state structure. Murtala Mohammed introduced the 19-state structure. So Nigeria became a 19-state structure under the government of Murtala Mohammed / Olusegun Obasanjo military administration. So we should not forget, as student of history, Gowon 12-state structure, Murtala Mohammed 19-state structure. And then subsequently, Obasanjo maintained the legacies of Murtala Mohammed until Shagari was handed over power to as the first executive president of Nigeria, not the prime minister. The prime minister was never an executive president. He was an executive prime minister. That's Alhaji Tafawa Balewa. But Alhaji Shehu Shagari became the first executive president of Nigeria. And like I've mentioned in my previous lectures, that Alhaji Shehu Shagari was sworn into office as the first executive president of Nigeria under presidential system of government by Justice Ademola Adetokunbo in 1979. And of course, his vice then was Dr. Alex Ekwueme. And when Shagari came to power, there was no state structure that was introduced by his government. But what really happened in his government was that there was enough corruption. Unqualified citizens were leaders. The governor of Kaduna State then, Balarabe Musa, with a deficiency in certificate, when he was asked, can you please give us or name some of the natural resources in your state? And he mistook that to soft drink. So when he was asked, he was saying, we have Fanta, we have Coke, we have Pepsi and Coke. And of course, that was an embarrassment to the military government of Nigeria. So when they saw that a lot of these politicians were uneducated, were unrefined, and they are leading, and there was a lot of embezzlement, then the military junta of Babangida had to take over power from Shagari. I mean, military junta of, beg your pardon, of Muhammadu Buhari, not Babangida. Muhammadu Buhari took over power from Shagari. And then, of course, Muhammadu Buhari came to power, brought some decrees in the name of trying to refine Nigeria, but did not introduce any state structure. And then Babangida came to the scene as well, when a lot of Nigerians were crying that his policies, the Buhari's policies, were so painful. So Babangida's military coup took Buhari out of power, and Babangida came to the scene on the 27th of August, 1985. And then when Babangida was there, he thought of initiating a state structure. So in 1987, August 27, 1987, Babangida introduced two-state structure to the existing 19-state structure. So Nigeria became a federation of 21 states under Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida's government in 1987. And then subsequently, Babangida promised to hand over power, but of course he did not. And then there was a particular bloody coup that could have taken his life in 1990, led by Gideon Oka. But he was able to succeed. He was able to escape that particular brutality, even though the brutality still affected his health till date. Of course, he was taken away and hidden somewhere. And then, unfortunately, the policy of relocation that was introduced initially by Muritala in 1976, that Abuja will be the center of Nigeria and Abuja will serve as the major capital. Babangida came to activate it. It was Muritala that brought about the idea of FCT. It was not Babangida. So it was in his plan. So, but Babangida, when that coup did not succeed over him in 1990, immediately Abuja became a major plan and Abuja was quickly constructed. And then Babangida relocated to Abuja in 1991. So Lagos ceased to be the capital of Nigeria in 1991. And Abuja became the new capital of Nigeria, the new FCT of Nigeria in 1991. And coupled with that, by that year in August, Babangida introduced a 9-state structure in 1991. So Nigeria became a federation of 30 states under Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida in 1991. So let me repeat again. In 1987, two state structures were introduced. It was initially 19. 19 plus 2 will give you 21. Then in 1991, he introduced another 9. So when you look at 21 plus 9, it will give you what? 30. So Nigeria became a 30-state structure under Ibrahim Badamasi Babangida in 1991. Then, as Babangida has promised earlier to hand over power, and of course, many Nigerians felt he was dribbling them, he refused to hand over power. And so what happened? By 1993, August 27, he was forced out of power. With the language he left behind, he said, I step aside. And then the Minister for Defense, in the name of Brigadier General Sani Abacha, came and took over power and became the general. He became the new head of state. So Abacha took over power from Babangida by November of that same year, 1993. And then, as he will also have it as part of his political structure, Abacha introduced 6-state structure to the political structure of Nigeria. State to the political structure of Nigeria. So 30 plus 6 will now give us what? 36, excluding Abuja, because Abuja is not a state. Abuja is the FCT. So currently, under Nigerian Federalism, we have 30-state structure. We have 30-state structure in Nigeria. 30-state structure. So these are some of the historical foundation of what became known as the structure and workings of Nigeria Federalism.